My name's Marc Shepard, coined the term restoration agriculture, and it's a contraction of two words. I very deliberately chose it. We're told over and over again that if we want ecological restoration, we have to take land out of production in order to have ecological restoration. And then agriculture, of course, means growing food. So I'm going to combine the two things, ecological restoration and agriculture. It's combination, simultaneous. Or it would be, you can approach it as an ecological restorationist who's also farming, or you can approach it as a farmer who's doing ecological restoration. I don't care what you call it, how you slice it, eco-agriculture, what are some of the other words you guys use? Agroecology, blah, 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 blah. Fundamentally different from annual agriculture. Annual agriculture, you plant your seeds in the ground, they grow for a season, and then they're finished. In order to get your seeds in the ground, you have to destroy a perennial ecosystem, whether it's a grassland, a savanna, or a forest. And you do it year after year after year. The soil blows away in the wind, washes away in the rain, and if you are actually growing in your crops in the soil, and you depend on the fertility of that soil and you're blowing it away, your soil gets less and less fertile every single year. So we have to do everything from chemical fertilizers, compost, cover crops, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So many of the inputs that we do in agriculture are because we're doing this kind of agriculture in a destructive way. We can use this kind of agriculture as a tool to accomplish ecosystem restoration at the same time. Every time that annual agriculture has been the basis of staple food crops in humans' diet, that culture has collapsed, period. Do your homework. Who knows where this is? That's in Syria. Who wants to go there right now and start farming or start researching or whatever? This, by the way, no longer exists. It was blown up by the last people who decided to explode rocks and push it all around. So, we have a different approach. We can take land like this and turn it into land like that in 15 short years at a profit. There is proof of concept. We've done over 100,000 acres in the past 10 years or so of systems like this. It works. We're going to mimic natural processes in our agriculture. Now, in a keynote speech, usually you come up with like all these little problems, annual agriculture, and then I'm supposed to come up with some wonderful solutions, and if we all follow it, everything's going to be fine. I can't, in good conscience, tell everybody things are going to be fine. Winston Churchill said once upon a time, as real hostilities started to break out in Europe, that we had the opportunity to change things. We are now living in the age of consequences. We have to now figure out how to survive through these consequences, and we can't fix the forces that are in play right now. If you're looking at CO2 in the atmosphere and the heat buildup that's here, it's going to be here for the next 100 years. It's going to be getting worse. We're the ones that can get better. We have to work with one another, stand beside one another, and restore the ecosystems of this planet and feed ourselves. I wrote a book. Yay, I got all kinds of literary awards. If I knew it was going to get literary awards, I would have done a better job. Been translated into several different languages, now going into Pular and Swahili. 2 different editions in Dutch. Wow. I thought that was something. We are living in the zombie apocalypse. And I like to use the term zombie apocalypse because we can talk about it and not feel horribly depressed. But there are horribly depressing things happening all around us. And farmers and agroforesters have so many answers it's not funny. And policymakers and researchers, if you research all the stuff that farmers and agroforesters are doing, support us, and the time for being afraid and cautious is over. We have to have a massive transformation. We have to do it fast, and we need all of us. Look at this. There's over 62 UN-funded refugee camps around the world right now. Nearly 2, there's probably more. 30% of the human race lives in slums. What's the point of educating kids in a situation like this? What's the point of educating people when there's no job waiting for you at the end? What if there's no food waiting for you at the end of the day? 119 out of 178 nations are considered fragile states at risk of collapse. Got it, thank you. How many of you are aware of trends in the world right now that everything's getting better? Has anyone seen any data out there? We have more resource of this and more of this and more of that. And the air is cleaner, the water's more pure, less and less expensive to do everything. There is no beautiful horizon here happening yet. We have to create the resource abundance of our future and live into it as we create it. People coming from all over the place, people displaced by war. Anybody heard of a war going on lately? Several different places. 68 million people right now displaced by warfare. Weather events. Was it like the last 10 years around here have been like some of the 10 driest years on record, and this year was one of the wettest on record? How do you do that? You know, Europe has this long history of pleasant, even, climate. It's a wonderful place to live in the past 1,000 years. But the last decade, good luck being a farmer. Tornadoes, storms, floods. About a third to a half of the U.S. cotton crop has been destroyed, like in the last 3 weeks. What's going to happen to the cost of your clothes? Sweet potatoes. Everybody eats sweet potato fries these days. They're a real popular thing. Well, we don't know what the damage to the sweet potato crop is yet. So restoration agriculture approach is we need to restore these ecosystems. Well, what was here historically and how did it operate? Because you think about that, the plant community types, the natural native plant community types have been here since the dawn of time. And they didn't require any tillage, they didn't require any fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides. They didn't even need any human intervention. They could do just fine without us. And they produced abundant yields, and they actually created the rich topsoil that we farm in now. So we can mimic that. Here are some of the vegetation zones of Europe. So look at where we are, where you are specifically. This is a pattern, big pattern. Now we go down to the details. One of the plant community types is the oak woodland, wood pasture, savanna, dehesa, etc. That's dominated primarily by oaks. And where was it? There were some beautiful oak trees out here just in the backyard. Just incredible oaks. Oak, chestnut, and beech, what do they have in common? Nuts, right? The oaks and the beech produce episodically. Research. Let's get some breeding work done, and let's breed beech and let's breed oak that produce a crop every single year, period. Because, generations worth of research there. Chestnut produces a crop every single year, and it's actually nutritionally equivalent to like brown rice. So it's a grain that grows on a tree. So we can grow the Fagaceae as the tall element in our system. Underneath it, I've got 2 hazelnuts. One should say apple. So if we're going to mimic this ecosystem, we can, put chestnuts in as the tall canopy layer. Apples as a sub-canopy. Also, we can put prunuses, our cherries, plums, apricots, peaches. Hazelnut is our shrub layer. Raspberries, grapes, and currants grown on either side. And then fungi decaying all the leaves, the branches, the trunks, in the soil, below the soil, on the roots. And forage, green grass grows all around, and the animals grazing that. Does anybody see anything in there that's edible? We can recreate an ecosystem here, the native European ecosystem, and we can eat all along the way. And if we see this forage part, we can have a row of trees, and we can have a bunch of forage, some kind of crop in between, and another row of trees, and then another bunch of forage. Wait a minute, this is beginning to sound like agroforestry. Whew. And this would be kind of what it would look like. Now, what were some of the dominant grazing animals right here before people were around? You guys are a lively bunch. Elephants, big hairy elephants. This is a great continent for hairy elephants. Well, if we're going to substitute the various different trees, shrubs, bushes, and vines, and we're going to substitute, good, higher yielding varieties for it, what would we substitute for hairy elephants? Look at all the who's who of critters out here. How about some, how about some cows? How about some pigs and turkeys and sheepies and chickens? Where is the need for fertilizer when you have these guys urinating and pooping all over the place? Where's the need to mow the grass next to your trees when you have these guys mowing the grass next to your trees? These guys are eating insects and seeds of weeds. And what's really cool about this, unlike a tractor, which doesn't reproduce itself and give you more tractors next year, this thing gives you lawnmowers and fertilizer spreaders every single year, more and more and more. And you don't even have to look at that as your farming enterprise. These are the managers of your farming enterprise. So we set up the ecosystem and they take care of it. That's how nature's been doing it always, forever. And then theoretically, because we don't see a lot of expenses out here, theoretically, we should have a couple more Bitcoins on our desktop or whatever that is. And so that would be kind of what it would look like. I would really, more research. I would like to see some researchers, instead of like, because you guys are familiar with like the Bos taurus, they're now breeding back towards the more, almost like the auroch. They're getting really close. Just breeding traditional varieties of cattle to get the traditional European cattle. Why don't we start breeding elephant varieties back till we get these nice little elephants with long hair on it again? That'd be really cool. We don't need to do cloning and GMOs and stuff like that. What you'll end up with is something that might look like this. This was a classic wood pasture form, was the term that I'm more familiar with over here in Europe, but that's on my farm, 15 years into the process, farming at a profit, producing food that I sell bulk wholesale, not specialty niche marketing or anything like that. We can design these systems so they can be mechanically planted, mechanically managed, mechanically harvested. Of course, the food has to be processed, then it has to be transported, stored, etc. How many of you guys ate today? We ate from machines. Get over it. If people are really hardcore about, oh, well, only, has to be small scale, human scale, we do it all by hand, we get higher productivity, stop eating then. And only eat stuff that came from hand managed farms. And I'll still continue to gain weight, and they will continue to starve. We're stuck in this thing right now. We depend on our machines. The scale that we need to feed the 8, 10, 12 billion, however many people are on this planet, is huge. It's not like a nice little nut farm with a nice little nut silo. We need to have large processing centers, large aggregation processing of these products that we grow in natural type systems. And we can own it together. If all of us here put down like 5,000 euros, how many euros is that? That's quite a pile of money. We could start a facility like this and harvest whatever it is. This is hazelnuts. And this is at my place. Anybody here from the Netherlands? This usually offends the Dutch sensibilities because this does not look like an orchard. It's not like a neatnik thing. This is a wild ecosystem of 100% food. If you go online and you look for a food forest, it doesn't look like a food forest. This is a forest of food. And you'll see, you've seen the aerial photograph of my place. And it produces a tremendous abundance of products. So the oak family is one of the families that we can key around. Now, the reason why we pick one tree as like the driver of the system is it's going to live the longest, and it's going to chemically and biologically change the soil, and the whole acidity, all the soil life will be adapted to oak, or in this case, walnut. And if you try to plant something like with walnut that's not compatible with walnut, it won't grow. So that's why you plant these things, because they're compatible with walnut. The Solanaceae, potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, are not compatible with walnut. And so we can have, forests or open grassland with walnut. Does anybody see anything in here that we have to convince people to eat a new food that they've never eaten before, and it might even taste terrible? No, this is all mass market products. There are markets for this today. We don't have to develop new markets. We don't have to develop new products. Pine nuts. Anybody ever buy any pine nuts lately? They're expensive, aren't they? Really expensive. You guys over here have an incredible advantage because there's at least maybe a half a dozen different varieties of pine nuts from the Italian pine that will grow in a parking lot in Saudi Arabia with no rain forever. And you go Swiss pine and Himalayan pine, Siberian pine that is super, super cold hardy. So pines, beech, cherries, plums, serviceberry, hazelnut. You guys familiar with Saskatoons? That's not native to Europe. I could have pulled that. Or do you have Saskatoon serviceberries? Amelanchier? You do have some? Cool. Lingonberries, raspberries, grapes, fungifores, and livestock. 100% edible, all natural, adapted, etc. And if we were to walk away from this, it'll take care of itself. Now, I put this one here because this is funny. If you look at certain species, we're going to do our homework and we're going to mimic the species that are adapted and natural in our area. Arizona black walnut grows in 5 states. You know, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, and Maine? How did that get up there? Well, I know exactly how it got up there because in 1985, I went to the desert Southwest and I saw these walnuts all over the ground. And I was, at the time, I was an ecology student at Unity College in Maine. Took a backpack full up to Maine, and it's all these logging roads in the middle of nowhere. My buddy had a truck, and we would go out like on a Friday and Saturday, you know, either drinking recreational ethanol or whatever you do when you're out in the logging roads. And you'd see an area of bare ground, and we'd just like throw some walnuts out there and walk on them. And now they're naturalized in Maine. With the changing weather patterns, moisture patterns, disease populations, pest populations, etc., trees and shrubs aren't able to migrate fast enough to keep up with the change sometimes. So they need a little help. Well, this, if you're trying to do this as a researcher, that would have been really stupid. You know, as a researcher, you'd want to be careful and go like 100 miles or 100 kilometers, just a little bit, keep pushing it this way and push it that way. I just jumped halfway across a continent. So now that we've identified our biome, we'll pick our plant community type we're going to work with. We know what our place eventually will look like. We know how it's going to go through succession and change through time. We know what kind of crops to expect. We know how to market our stuff, etc. Now we're going to construct some earthworks. Water is kind of a significant thing. There are all kinds of fertilizers that a plant can do without. You know, nitrogen, oh, it's a big thing. Got to have NPK, proper mineral balance and all that. None of that matters if you don't have water. That's the one plant nutrient that we don't know of any plants right now that grow without water. Wrote about that in a series of books that I don't have, and these have not been translated into, you know, Dutch or French or whatever. We need to use some tools. Laser levels. Usually the civilian quality GPS units are not accurate enough for this, whereas a laser level will get within 1.5 inches over 2 kilometers sometimes. We might need bulldozers or excavators. And then we make these trenches in the ground. What's really neat about these trenches in the ground is that when it's raining too much, it's kind of taking the water away to a place where we want to store it. Then when it's not raining enough, we've stored it somewhere. Now we can use it. And if we set up our system right, we can now use it all gravity feed with no pumps. So is that brilliant or what? How much percentage, who knows this, what percentage of Belgian agriculture is polder right now? Is it 10%, 20%? Nobody knows? Okay, I was just curious. Because you use the same set of techniques in the uplands, up in the hills. You use these trenches to soak water into the soil and to move to ponds, and then you can gravity feed and irrigate. Well, you use the trenches and mounds to move the water in the lowlands to get it to the pump station and get it the heck out. Same techniques with a different outcome. Depends how you design the system. So when you look at my farm in southwest Wisconsin, all those patterns are because of the water channels that are moving the water from the high points slightly down. I'm taking it away from the valley, high in the valley, slightly lower out to the ridges where I soak it in and store it in ponds. Can't move water uphill, but we can move it down valley ever so slightly downhill. That's what the water used to do before we put all these crazy lines in place. Now it's all over the place. One of the benefits of having little ponds all over the place is I graze cattle and hogs. I don't have to move water tanks around. I don't have to have all kinds of expensive pipes and infrastructure in place because they've got ponds to water on all the time. What's also nice about that is my amphibians populations have gone sky high. Why would I want amphibians? Because they eat insects. So now my insect control goes down. So we've identified our biome, constructed some earthworks to manage the water. Now we're going to establish perennial polycultures. Perennial means it comes back year after year after year. Polyculture means numerous different species in the same place. One of the interesting things, once upon a time, ecologists realized that, look, the most photosynthetically productive ecosystems on the planet have this amazing number of species in it. So, the number of species was directly related to the total photosynthetic productivity. So then they said, well, it must be because there's functional relationships between this species and this one helps that one, and blah, blah, blah. And so they've tested that for like 30, 40 years for a while. And all of a sudden they said, no, it's related to the absolute number of species. It doesn't matter, these functional connections. Just the more species you have, the more site yield you will have. Less individual yield per species, but more total site yield. So our balancing act as agroforesters and farmers, how many species can we cram into one place to get highest total site yield? It will give us a individual reduction in yield of each different species. Well, how many can we manage? And what I figured out, I can handle about 4 above ground perennial species and 3 species of livestock. Any more than that, I don't have enough crop or animals to sell, because I got to get them on a truck somehow and ship them away, or it just gets too crazy to manage. Once I had like cattle, turkeys, chickens, sheep, hogs, and guineas, and it was a zoo. Ha ha ha! I guess it was, wasn't it? I couldn't handle it, it was too much. Got out of control. Go. So, alley cropping, silvo arable. You guys are most of you familiar with that, being agroforesters? We plant a crop in the alley, and our trees are the row of trees. That's a single species in that row. I talked to some research stuff. Let's go some research stuff and then policy stuff. Research. If we're going to do total number of species increases the overall photosynthetic yield of that area, well, how many species can we cram into one place? So let's try a single species row. What's the total, yield of biomass? Well, now let's put 2 species, 3 species, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and see where we get a sweet spot somewhere in there where we have the most edible stuff or marketable stuff or feed for livestock. That would be really cool research to do. And then policy. Think about a farmer who puts in a high density row of 100 different species. We need farmers to have the freedom and the ability to plant way too many trees on a piece of ground. And then when those trees compete with one another, they have to have the freedom and the right and ability to go ahead and cut them down. So how do we make it easier for the land manager themselves to actually manage this ecosystem without, I guess Brussels is in your own country, isn't it? Everybody else complains about Brussels telling them what to do with their trees. It's like, I guess some of you farmers do too. So the alley crop is the short-term cash flow, and the tree crop is the long-term. And we cram them in close, really close. Usually when we're doing a large commercial planting, we'll be putting like berry bushes and shrub species, sometimes 2 feet apart. And then every 6 feet, we'll have a tree that eventually becomes a canopy. And we stagger it, so we go like, small shrub, medium canopy tree, tall canopy tree, short canopy tree, vine right on the tree, so we really cram them in tight. And then we manage by harvesting yields. You guys all familiar with the land equivalent ratio? We see some nods. Okay, so I'll go to the next one, because this was, you guys can go look this up online. This was done in the US as a PhD thesis. If we take a hectare of maize, you get 100% maize. That's 1. If you now take 20% of that land out of maize, you now have a 20% reduction in your yield on maize. It's now 0.8. So, hey farmers, I'm going to tell you how to get lower yields. Nobody gets excited about that. But if we take the 20% out in wide-spaced rows, now we have rows that are 50 feet apart. We can cram extra walnuts in there. We can put about 50% of the walnuts that we would have put on a whole acre because they got plenty of room on the side. So you get a 0.8 of maize plus a point, what did I say? 0.5, right, of the walnut, because that's the numbers that they came up with there. And if this is the corn belt in the USA, where most of the maize is grown, on all of these acres there, they would produce more total calories per acre, more yield per acre on that, anywhere to like double the yields per acre. By getting half the yield, 80% less, or 20% less than half the yield, you can still get twice as much total on each acre of ground. Alley cropping, this is at my place. I do a lot of acorn squash. I'd have a rotation. I'd go from acorn squash the first year, have a cover crop through the wintertime, then have green bell peppers or cucumbers the second year, then do a cover crop through the wintertime, winter rye, winter wheat. Then in the following spring, I'd put down a clover mix, some short, medium, and tall clovers, and let the rye grow to maturity, combine it off, and have all the straw stay on the site. The clover comes up underneath. When the clover goes to seed, I'd roll that down, so all that seed and all that straw gets packed down. Approximately 20,000 pounds of hard woody carbon gets thrown on the site, and anywhere from 200 to 400 pounds of nitrogen from all the different clovers and legumes and the decomposition of the straw. Then I would keep it in that rotation for 3 years with the grain. And if you harvest your grain, you'll get a lot of resprouts coming back. I get about 2 years that was normal yields coming off of my wheat. The first one, I actually planted that seed. Well, the second one, I harvested that last crop and enough seed scattered on the ground, and because I didn't, get rid of it with tillage or herbicide, it sprouted up again. So I got like 2 full yields in a row. Then the third year, it's kind of like, not really all that good. The weeds start coming in. So then I'd graze the heck out of it. Graze it right down to the quick. This is how you can see all the different, there's an alley, a swale, the berm, trees. Alley, swale, berm, trees, and this all green here is asparagus. It was the original soil that I started farming in 1995. And then by farming this way, within 15 years, it looks like that. It's still a sticky, heavy clay, tends to compaction and wetness. If you get a wet season, it takes a few years to recover from it. Well, when you, pardon? Oh, when you go ahead and have these tree rows in there, the tree row never gets disturbed. Now you have extra root exudates going on and extra leaves coming down, extra wood that's getting chipped and decomposing. This is the stuff that comes out of the tree rows after 25 years to turn red clay into that. How much fertilizer did I ever add to this system? Nothing. You ever seen a tree growing out of a cliff? Who did the soil preparation, the cover crops, the mulch, the $40 hole for a $10 tree? It's like, no. Nature creates the soil. And if we're farming in such a way that our soil is deteriorating, it's not nature's fault, it's our fault. We're doing something wrong. And so let's turn this around and start to follow nature's processes of succession and create new topsoil as we go through time. Now, depending on the condition of your farm right now, and depending on what practices you use and what crops you use, it may take you longer or shorter to get there. That's some of my wheat and my chestnuts. Oops, there's a thistle and a Queen Anne's lace and some daisies. Horrible. And it's designed around machinery. There's a lot of permaculture folks that don't like me. I'm doing permanent agriculture, but they don't like me because I'm using machines. Well, sorry. There's asparagus between rows of chestnut. Silvopasture is the intentional combination of livestock and trees and pasture. We're managing all three. It's not sticking animals out in the woods, because then you're going to destroy your woods and the animals aren't going to get enough to feed. It's a balancing act where the land manager is making sure there's enough light coming through on the canopy to get good grass growth, and you're moving your cattle along so you don't overgraze your pasture so it recovers completely and fully. And I throw in other species as well, such as mulberry here. I send the cattle through first. They'll graze it down. And then I send the pigs in next, because if you put pigs in the tall grass, they'll just kind of walk through the grass and they never eat anything. But if you cut it down short and it starts to grow back, pigs will get easily 50% of their daily intake will be from grazing grass. And it looks like this. One of the earliest crop yields that I get out of a system like this are pasture walkers. You go ahead and you say, hey, come see my really cool silvopasture system, and you charge people, $20 to show up. They get a soda pop and a hot dog, and they'll walk around in the freezing rain all day long looking at the pasture. That's my first yield. These are my favorite employees. They get up in the morning, they work all day long. And if you ever have any fruit like apples and whatnot, and you don't spray, in the early part of the season, you're going to get, in the US, they call it the June drop, when all of the first ones that got insect bit fall off the tree. Animals go in, they clean it all up. Those first larvae get turned into bacon, which I like a lot more than bugs. And if you look at the numbers, if I get rid of the first hatch of insects, a dramatic reduction in that first hatch of insects, I get way less down the line. I forgot what the numbers are like, but like with houseflies alone, a pair of houseflies turns into something like 9 billion houseflies by the end of the summer. And you start knocking back the first generation, second generation, using animals, pigs or chickens, to get those first larvae, then you drastically cut down your pest pressure later on in the season. There's issues with food safety. So we have a time period that animals can't be there if there's going to be some human food harvested from a system. And so one of the ways I solve that in my hazelnuts is I found a cosmetics market. It's not food. I can have the animals right in there right up to 2 weeks before I harvest. And that's pretty cool. Cows in the pine. You have a lot of, this is the portable electric fence. I was given a tour once, and this big cowboy kind of guy with the big hat says, is that your fence right there? I said, yeah. He says, well, that's no fence, that's a suggestion. So, okay, yeah. And if you're this short and you got a wet nose and little pointy feet and you're well grounded, you can hear these things bark from like a half a mile away. And then you try to move the fence so the pigs can kind of go to the next pasture, and they'll come up to where the fence was yesterday and they kind of look at it side-eyed. It's like, it was there yesterday. Cows in the pines. So we've identified our biomes, dominant plant communities, manage our water, our runoff. We established the perennial polycultures. We locate our fence, roads, utilities, pipelines. Everything now follows the pattern of the water management. I just took a picture with my colleague Chris in the other room there. We stood up against the wall with all these different agroforestry photographs. It's like, it came from Europe. I'm not blaming you. This is my ancestors too. Whose brilliant idea was it to make everything square and rectangular? Even if you're using horses, you can't make a 90-degree turn. And if you're going up to the end of the row and you hit a fence, you have to stop, lift up the equipment, turn it around, and there's all this space you're not growing anything in. So if only the headlands, that alone, what an incredible waste of space, because we had this concept, this stupid idea in our mind that's like, oh, everything's got to be perfectly square and grid shaped. It's like, no, what if we had them all shaped like this? And you get out in the morning, if you're pulling your horse, pulling a plow, you go out in the morning, you go like this, and you go up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. You never lift the plow, you never back up, and you go right back into your shed and you're done. It's super efficient. But square corners, wow. So the new pattern is going to look like this. And believe it or not, it's more efficient. It's more efficient. I have 0 headlands, no dead space. If you were to put headlands around all of this, I mean, it's like acres and acres and acres. That's 110 acres, 45 hectare, something like that. And that's what it ends up looking like. All of these are based on my equipment width. I'm using machines, accessing wholesale markets. The buildings all heat themselves and produce their own electricity. I'm using solar and wind, and the system is perennial. And if I go away, it's still there. There was 12 years ago, I had a surgical situation. Farmers sometimes get hurt and you got to go to the hospital. And so there was no farming activity that occurred for a whole entire season. I go back the next year and it was better. Because it grew. It grew. And it was better. Now we're going to manage for eternity by closely mimicking the historic disturbance regime. Now, The disturbance regime, in ecological terms, is something like windstorms knock stuff over. Fire comes through and it wipes it all out. Big herds of grazing, browsing animals come through and they eat everything all up. And what's really fascinating, there's a lot of people who are like, eco-defenders that want to, make the world a better place, and we have to stop cutting trees because that's ruining everything. It's like, yeah, but you know what? Every once in a while, nature erases everything. Yeah, but we have to keep that carbon on the site. Well, that's not what nature thinks. You have a volcano, kaboom, just wipes all of the carbon's gone. Fire comes through, whoom, all the carbon is gone. The windstorm blows it over, the mushrooms decay it all. There's these events that happen episodically that are different, based on each different ecotype and ecoregion where you're from, that these catastrophic events come through and they wipe everything out and it starts over again. So we'll set up a system that mimics that. And what's great, volcano. Funny that I would mention that. This happened when I was in high school. I told you how old I am. This is in Mount St. Helens in Spokane, Washington. A full, complete ecosystem, perennial, highly productive, all kinds of species there. Then kaboom. This is a site-specific extinction event, massive wipeout. And all the ecologists in the news are saying, oh, it's going to take generations for it to recover, such a massive disturbance. Within 4 years, it was a grassland. Within like 10 years, there's like flowers all over the place. There's a principle or concept called ecological refugia. And if it was a big, gigantic asteroid falling from the sky and wiping the planet out, if that's a true story, the dinosaur wipeout meteor, look what came out of that. Look at the beauty and the diversity and all these amazing natural ecosystems. Who put that in motion? We didn't. Incredible productivity came out after that extinction event. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when the atomic bombs went down, kablooey. Ground zero, like less than a kilometer away from ground zero, there's a temple that was wiped out, and it was just like this little steel rods that were part of the dome, and it was a concrete building. And there were these 2 charred stumps of ginkgo trees. Those ginkgo trees are now a historic monument in Japan, and people go there. That's a temple for a reason. They can take, these plants and plant community types can take ground zero of nuclear weapons, and they come back amazingly diverse. What we're throwing at them right nowadays, this is nothing. The planet's been here before. It's cool. It's us who's going to suffer if we really screw things up. This was 15 years difference. So somehow these guys right here didn't get destroyed or burned up when that volcano blew up. So one of the things I'm advocating is we all work together. We have researchers, students, we have farmers, we have, everybody, a cross-section, people who eat food, people who grow the food, work together and set up ecological refugia with every single possible edible plant that is native to, Europe, wherever you are. Get some from the southern part of the range where it's hotter and drier. Get some from the northern part of the range where it's maybe colder. Get stuff from where it's wetter, et cetera, and throw it all together in the same place. And now manage it by farming it. In all those different plant community types that I mentioned, we can harvest crops off of that. And we manage the system by harvesting crops and using our livestock and then eating them. Or you don't have to eat them. Let the animals take care of the system, and you can eat the plants, the fruits and the nuts and the berries. It's a full, complete human diet, whether you're vegetarian, vegan, or a bloodthirsty carnivore. And that's the same Mount St. Helens, 35 years later. And just as significant as everything is the decay cycle. You drop a stick on the ground, it's going to decay. The first decay organisms that most of us are familiar with, of course, are fungus. Fungus are delicious. So I don't do the same kind of pruning if you go around and see people with an apple orchard. You saw the picture of my apple orchard. It doesn't look like an orchard. I'm not constrained by the concept orchard, and it doesn't have to look like a Dutch countryside. And I'm not insulting the Dutch countryside because your Belgian countryside looks a lot like it too. So I'll just go through and I'll make sure that the branches on the trees don't knock me off my tractor. And I cut them off, put them on the ground, chip them up. But when I chip them up, I inoculate them with various different kinds of mushrooms. They're going to decay anyways. Fungus is going to get in there. I might as well kind of drive the system by inoculating things with my kinds of mushrooms, and then I can go pick these later, and they show up on their own. Well, because all of a sudden there was a new resource, or it rained just the right, the temperatures are just perfect, and that right there was $300 worth of mushrooms. And what did I do? I'm actually taking care of my chestnut trees. And this side effect of $300 worth of mushrooms, shiitakes and strophareas, oyster mushrooms. So when we mimic the natural plant and animal community types, and we manage by mimicking the natural processes, what's the result? For one, we will probably get lower yields of absolutely everything. But you add them up and it's more total yield. I'm happy with only a 50% yield of chestnuts and a 50% yield of sunflowers and a 50% yield of raspberries and a 50% yields and like 50%. So I've got 250% total yield. I'm happy with getting lower yield of the individual crop and more total yield. And what were my expenses? Who's actually doing the fertilizing out here? Who's doing the mowing of the grass? Who's doing the pest control? Who's doing the disease control? Another profit center, the livestock. So an expense, instead of being a minus, it now becomes a double plus because it's no longer a minus and it's a revenue stream. So the numbers on this flip dramatically. Back to you researchers. There's something to go ahead and start researching the economics of polycultures. He nods and he said he was a researcher, so I'm going to keep looking at him because he's. So when we mimic nature's plant and animal communities and we manage the site by mimicking natural processes, we get agriculture. This farm, this is my farm right there, when I took it over, was abandoned because the soil was all played out, washed down to the clay and bedrock. There's huge erosion gullies in it. It was only producing about 130 bushels of corn, maize, per acre, which is way below the national average in the USA. And so if you did the math on how many human calories that was, if there were like 1 million calories, the only human calories are only 15% because the majority of that goes to feed livestock. And if it's cattle, you have to deduct 90% of that because of just the trophic metabolism of the animals. And the other 15% of corn goes into making automobile fuel. It's not even food for people, really, the majority of the corn crop in the USA. So we all of a sudden turn that from a really poor performing annual crop system into a perennial system like this with vegetables, grains, chestnuts, hazelnuts. Is about 30% more human calories per acre the last time this was measured. I really wish that somebody would have gotten 5 times as many total. No, it was just incrementally more, but for how much less work? A lot less work. Apples, cherries, grapes, berries, beef, pork, poultry, mushrooms, and what really upped the ante was this summer, was my first summer with a border collie. I just go, hey, Rudy, go get the cows. 5 minutes later, it's like, this is great. This is really cool. So, and he's having a blast. And nature. And these were all creatures seen on my farm. The snapping turtle in North America has the highest mortality rate of any terrestrial creature. Like only 1 out of 300 makes it to sexual maturity. I'm a mile and a half, what's that, 3 kilometers away from the nearest surface water anywhere else. Where did it come from? And happy to report, Rudy found the snapping turtle. 6 years later, he's now about the size of a shovel, and he was mean, and Rudy didn't like him. This is the polyculture. We get yields. It's abundant. And what happens if these grapes aren't table grade and you can't sell them as eating grapes? Well, you squish them and you ferment them and you make delicious drink. I used to do a cider business for a long time too. I'd rather send the pigs out. And little pigs, they'll stand up and they'll eat the grapes right off the vines. It's amazing. These are American hazelnuts. They're different from yours. They don't fall free from the husk, and they don't get as tall. They usually only get about as tall as a lilac bush. And what I think is really amazing, this is a tree frog, gray tree frog, and that's a caterpillar, and this tree frog's like, how am I going to get that thing down? That's when it's extended, it's about the size of a hot dog. And that's a polyphemus moth. It's North America's largest moth, extremely rare. So here's a rare species I've got growing on the farm. I also have a couple endangered species growing on the farm, and I don't tell the Department of Natural Resources where they are. Because the reason why I've got them is because I farm this way. Because I've got the best habitat around. Luna moths. You know, this makes me question evolution. You tell me that like these orange and yellow and blue spiky balls on your back is going to give you some sort of reproductive advantage? Hello? I don't get it. And then, oh, is this camouflage? Camouflaging from what? It's like a circus parrot. And that's a sphinx, the greater sphinx moth. And we get food. You know, large quantities of food I'm selling into wholesale markets, not niche market, farmers market stuff. My weasel. This is one of the rare and endangered species. It's a northern cricket frog. When an adult jumps into a puddle, lays the eggs, it only takes 11 days for new adults to come out the other side. They're adapted to those spring puddles out in your fields, but they need habitat and they can't be disturbed. This is the most rare mushroom in North America. And I eat well. I eat really well. You can't keep an organism this big alive unless you have like lots of scoops of high quality food. And then you get the side benefit of this. Those who are landowners, probably around here, you know, I don't know what the hunting regulations are like, but people who live in town, they don't have any place to go. So they come out to your place for the weekend, you have a couple of these little tiny homes around and you charge them like $3,000 a week. And they stay in the cabin and they get, I was going to say shit-faced, but that would be a dirty word. So they get very drunk for most of the time and they rarely go out and hunt. But to see pictures like this on a trail camera, they'll pay big bucks for it. And at the end of the day, at least I can look myself in the mirror. If I'm going to be inside, I'd rather look at this and say, you know what? I've worked my arse off for a long period of time. And a lot of people have thought I've been crazy doing a lot of different things. But you know what? I'm really proud of the fact that we've transformed hundreds of thousands of acres from barren, dirt, eroded, rundown farm properties into rich, abundant ecosystems that they used to be, and the farmers are paying their bills all along the way. I don't think anybody's getting rich farming. If you are, let me know, because I'd like to talk to you afterwards. I got some projects for you. But we have a good life, and it gets easier. I no longer have to bend down and pick cucumbers. I can stand up and harvest off of trees. And so what I would like to do is encourage all of you and enlist all of you, no matter what your expertise is. We are in the time of consequences. We have to figure out how to get through this and still be sane, kind, loving, civil human beings and get through to the other side. We have to create the ecological paradise of our future because no one else is coming to do it for us. So thank you very much for tolerating me.
My question is, you said they're returning some animals to your farm, like including some big animals and also dangerous animals. I wondered what's your
Which
view?
animals were dangerous?
No, I heard it's somewhere else. The rattlesnake.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I didn't invite them.
Yeah, but what's your view on managing them? Like
That's actually a really cool point because I did take a slide off. I took the picture of the rattlesnake away, and I also took a picture of the bear poop away. What we are learning, what I'm personally learning, is why our ancestors killed all those animals. I used to raise poultry, a lot of poultry, fairly free range, no cages and no pulling stuff around, until 5 years ago, a Cooper's hawk moved in. Now, a Cooper's hawk eats birds, and only birds. You can't train them, you can't scare them away, they eat birds. Well, my system has so many other birds around that it doesn't move away after it kills all my chickens. And so we will learn these new old things that our ancestors knew, and we'll have to figure out ways to adapt to it. Because at least my personal perspective, I'm not interested in creating the extinction of any other species. There's only one that I'm uncomfortable with. We have North American mountain lions, wildcats, and what's interesting about the big cats, their canines are the same width apart as C5 in your neck. And they just drop out of a tree and go, and it just severs your spinal cord right there, and I don't want that. I don't want that. I can handle bears; they're cool. The rattlesnakes are nice. They at least give you a little warning. But yeah, so we have to figure this out. We don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Is not knowing okay?
Yeah, sure.
I'm still not afraid to restore ecosystems because I think that's more important.
Nog één vraag. Ja, helemaal achteraan. Sta even recht misschien. Voilà, en stel je vraag.
You get anthrax.
Okay. I'm a farmer and transformer from fruits to cider. But in Belgium, we have a problem of land access. Like the projects you do and we see are mostly big projects for us, big lands you reform. But how does it work on small scales? Because in Belgium, we all have real small scale parcels where we have to work with. Like, how do you advise to get there on?
Small scale brings up a couple of issues that are basically ecological issues. Is that if you're going to have a suburban situation, you people live in a village somewhere, and this lady decides to go backyard, totally permaculture, jungle, whatever. That is now an oasis where all of the pests and diseases come to because they're not spraying, and all the neighbors are spraying, so that becomes a problem. So some of those issues are more obvious, the pest and disease control, when you have a smaller system. But if you have more systems in place that are next to each other, now you start to get scale. You don't have to own a large scale project as long as there's a lot of smaller scale projects next to each other. And as I said earlier too, is we're going to approach a purely ecological farm as best that we can with the resources that we have and the best of our ability. We may never get there all the way. And so the small systems have a lot to do with that. But the land access, what my problem was, and a lot of the people in the USA, and especially here, is that the land is so expensive that you can't pay the mortgage on that land with agricultural revenues. Well, okay, fine. I'm going to look at the land as my real estate investment, and I'm going to get a group of investors together that buy that land. Their return is as a long-term capital gains. The property is going to be worth more money just by owning it because there's more people and not more land. And we're going to turn an eroded field into something like that, and then with recreational opportunities. So the real estate investment is profitable if you look at as a real estate investment. Well, now who's going to take care of that land? The farmer comes in, and we give the farmer a drastically reduced rent or lease payment. So the farmer farms this way, takes care of that asset for the real estate holders. And in my case, is if I'm going to farm a piece of property and pay a lease to it, I'm going to also own a part of that property. So I'll be a fractional owner of it. And over time, as the payments go down and the yields come up, then I can buy out the investor partners over time. I only finished, I say, no, I didn't finish. I still have 2 investors on my property. I don't own it all. The bank owns it at first, and then now the investors own it. But I get to use it because I have the long-term lease, and it's a really affordable lease. And it's the real estate investment that's going to make my retirement money, not the farming.